Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. More than 700,000 people immigrated to the United States in 2003. Hundreds of thousands more are expected this year. Immigrants face a bewildering and daunting set of laws, rules, and regulations regarding visas, green cards, naturalization, and more. The questions are endless and the answers difficult to find. To answer some of your questions and to point to resources for the answers to hundreds of others is Allan Wernick, author, columnist, teacher, and practicing attorney in U.S. immigration and citizenship matters. Allan is a colleague of mine at Baruch College and chairman of CUNY's Citizenship and Immigration Project at CUNY. He is also the author of the leading popular guide on immigration, U.S. Immigration and Citizenship, Your Complete Guide, now in its fourth edition. Allan also writes a weekly column which is syndicated by King Features Syndicate, and another column appears every Thursday in the New York Daily News. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Sunday, I'm reading the Sunday papers, and I come across an article in the Daily News. I said, it's perfect. I need to talk to Allan about this, and it's authored by Allan Wernick. And the paper headline reads, Answers to Your Status Woe. More than 6,500 calls taken as Daily News and CUNY phone-in proves big success. Talk about this project, Citizenship Now, and what it is and where it's going.
Well, the program that you're referring to was a week-long call-in at the New York Daily News. It was sponsored by CUNY and the Daily News, and the purpose was to answer callers' questions about immigration law. And the phones were ringing from the time we started till the time we end. We answered, actually, the final count was over 6,800
Wow.
questions. But, of course, more than 130,000 people called in and couldn't get through.
Wow.
So it's a huge project. And this effort, it's the second time we've done it, and we'll be doing it with the CUNY and the Daily News. We'll be having call-ins twice a year now. It all started in the late 1970s, 1997, and it grew out of CUNY's voter registration effort. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the students were concerned because they couldn't register to vote because they weren't U.S. citizens. So the Office of Student Affairs and the Vice Chancellor for Government Relations, Jay Hershenson, initiated this citizenship project at the university. And we started by training people at every single campus in the university and training individuals to do citizenship. And then we also had some staff that we sent out with cameras, and we did everything. And people leave there ready to go with their citizenship applications. And it's grown since then. Right now, CUNY has 4 full-time immigration service centers for its students, staff, and faculty. We've recently received funding, so we'll be able to expand those services and do more services to the community. Of course, we do this call-in. And we also are implementing this coming semester at the end of January a new educational program, a certificate in immigration legal studies. It's a graduate program, and it'll be available to individuals throughout the city. It has 3 courses: an introductory course, a business law course, and a deportation law course. And it'll be a great place for paralegals to learn how to do this stuff. And I just want to say, you know, there's no question that there's no university in the country, private or public, that even comes close to providing the kinds of services for its immigrant students that CUNY does.
And no university comes close to having the number of immigrant students that we have in CUNY. I've been teaching since 1980, and we know in the classroom who the new immigrants are immediately. I guess there are 3 institutions, us, the public schools, and the jails, who see the immigrants first. I want to focus more on this Daily News,
Sure.
CUNY connection. The Daily News really made a big deal of this. In fact, they announced on the prior Monday that this was going to happen, and they laid out a spread of the people who would be involved. And the Daily News really is very, very interested in this issue. I mean, you've been doing your column for how long with that?
Yeah, I've been doing it for over 10 years now. And there's no question about it. I mean, the Daily News is the working people's paper in New York City, and that's immigrants. Over 40% of the people living in the city now are foreign-born. Over 57% of the households have an immigrant living in their household. And the Daily News, I have to say, I'm pretty impressed that for 10 years they've run my column, and they haven't been deterred by any of the some of the restriction of sentiment that's grown up. I think a lot some due to 9/11, but I think also a lot due to the crisis in the economy, because when people are competing for jobs, sometimes immigrants are not looked at so favorably. But the column it's been well supported, and this column, of course, costs a lot of effort for the Daily News. We operate out of their offices. Takes a lot of space in the paper. They have to provide food and other kinds of support, but it's just been terrific, and it's a great experience. And one thing that's really amazing about it is that the participants, which come from both inside of CUNY, about 70% are CUNY staff, lawyers, counselors, human resource folks, and about 30% come from not-for-profit institutions, and some are just private lawyers that we've recruited. But to a person, they found it to be an exciting experience. They say, please invite me back. And these people are working hard, because some of them are there every day. Some of them just come for a couple of days. But it's hard work to answer those phones.
And you did it from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. over a full 5-day week. I mean, this was an extensive operation. Obviously, everybody's pleased because you did an original one in April. Now you've done one in November, and now it's going to be semi-annually, so it's got to be successful. Let's turn to some of those questions. I mean, I found it absolutely fascinating. And in fact, I went to the CIS, the Citizenship and Immigration Service webpage, the successor to the INS, and I looked at their frequently asked questions, and their answers were confusing. And then I went to the law, and that's even more confusing. You've got very simple questions and difficult answers, but they're answered in a way that's easily understandable. Now, what you have here in this spread that appeared on Sunday were the top 10 questions. And the first question was, I'm a permanent resident. When can I apply for U.S. citizenship? So we're really starting with very, very basic stuff that people don't understand because the official information services are inadequate. So you compile these questions. How did you put together both the responses when they're called in, and also how do you then write your column? Two separate questions.
Well, one thing is that first question, it's actually surprised me, because it was one of the most common questions asked. And people would call in, they've been a permanent resident for 10, 15 years. Until they read about it in the Daily News and called us, they didn't know what the rules were. They didn't know whether they qualify for citizenship or not. And that's quite shocking when you think about how much talk there is among politicians in particular, and some advocacy groups, about how important it is for people to become citizens.
Sure.
The resources and the information just aren't out there. So the way we compiled this particular list was, again, based on just being there myself, 10 hours a day for 5 days a week. We tried to look at the questions that, as are indicated in the column, that were most commonly asked. For my weekly column, it's people send me emails and letters. The emails come to me through my website, and the letters go to the Daily News. They're forwarded to me. I go through them. I try and pick questions that I haven't answered recently. One thing I'm going to have to change is that, I have sort of an informal rule. I don't answer the same question more than once every 6 months. But I'm realizing that some of these basic questions, like how do you become a citizen? How do you get permanent residence?
Right. I want to naturalize. How do I get started was the number 2 question.
That's right. So I think I'm going to have to answer them more often, because obviously the public needs the answer. And I get them. I mean, I get them in my emails and the letters that I get.
How did you start studying immigration, and how did you become the leading analyst commentator on the subject of the legalities of immigration and naturalization? How did you start?
Well, first let me thank you for describing me that way. I don't want any of my colleagues to be upset. That's your prerogative to do that.
Well, I firmly believe it. I wouldn't say it.
It was really by accident. You know, it was in the early '70s. I went to law school. I was committed to doing something with my legal education that would help people. And just by accident, I was looking for a place to live. I ended up living in what we called then, in those days, an urban commune.
An urban commune.
An urban commune.
Ah, this is a good story.
It is a good story. Right near the community of Watts in Los Angeles. And one of the people living in the commune was a director of an immigration center for a group of Mexican immigrants. And back in those days, before the growth, tremendous growth in international trade, immigration was really a small group of people who practiced it. It wasn't a big area like it is now. Now there's close to 10,000 lawyers who call themselves immigration lawyers. At that time, there were just a few hundred. So I sort of became an expert overnight. I mean, I remember at the end of my first summer, the director of that center, a man named Bert Corona, who was a leading activist and for undocumented immigrants in the United States and in Los Angeles in particular, sent me to speak to a group of hotel and restaurant employers about some immigration issues. So I put on my one suit and my one tie and tied back my long hair, and I was out there. So like I said, in those days there weren't that many people, and so you know, you develop an expertise, you stick with it. And every time I've tried to do something different, it's sort of like The Godfather, you know, I kept being pulled back in, you know, and I guess I feel that with so much experience and so much expertise, it really doesn't make sense for me to try and do too many other things. I really want to take advantage of that experience, expertise, and do what I can to help the immigrant community and also to help CUNY, because I think it's certainly a worthwhile institution.
And you've been at CUNY a long time. You were at Hostos for, what, nearly 20 years, and now, as of September of this year, you're a colleague of mine at Baruch. So you're tying in your teaching with this practice. How do you do it all?
Well,
besides being a type A, obviously.
Well, you know, it's not easy, and of course, as we're doing things, the work expands. But I have to say, I have to give credit without seeming to suck up. You know that the administration of the university is really behind, and the administration of Baruch College is really behind my work. And so when I need help with things, resources, either equipment resources or personnel resources, they provide them. And, you know, each time they give you a new project, I go to them, I say I need some more resources. Right. So there's always a transition when I'm doing more of the work than I feel like I ought to be doing or can do, but then usually I can transition to new resources. So, you know, I manage, but it's been a real exciting ride so far. OSOS was a great experience. It's a disproportionately immigrant, mainly from the Dominican Republic, but many other countries as well, including the English-speaking Caribbean. Now we're starting to see Chinese immigrants come to the college, and has many fine programs. I helped, while I was there, I helped develop a Women's and Immigrants' Rights Center that provided services to the students. I helped develop a public interest paralegal program while I was there. So it was a really great experience, and they were very supportive. I wanted to get a change. I want to do something different. I'm very happy that Baruch has taken me on.
You write a weekly column, as we said, for the Daily News, as well as for the King Syndicate, answering questions. Where do you go from there in terms of your interest, for example, in policy? Because you're interested in, you know, from a political scientist point of view or a public affairs professor, you're interested in the policies and programs of immigration as well. Why not an analysis column or a commentary column?
Yes, I'm working on it. I mean, I'm discussing doing such a column with the Daily News. We'll see if it ever gets implemented. I would like to do more of that, more analysis of current laws, analysis of the practice of the Immigration Service, some of the political and social issues faced, particularly in New York City. I also have been, you know, working for a couple of years trying to outline a book policy book on immigration. Well, I think that maybe the time has come for something new and different.
Let's talk a little bit about policy. Recently, President Bush met with Mexican President Fox and talked about immigrant relations between the two nations. Just briefly describe sort of the state of immigration law at the national level, where we're headed, and where you would want us to head if you were in charge of immigration policy in the United States.
Right. Well, we're coming out of a very restrictionist period. The 1996 immigration reform legislation and the welfare reform legislation signed by President Clinton was probably some of the most restrictive legislation and punitive legislation affecting immigrants in maybe 20, 30 years. But according to President Bush, he says he's supporting a temporary worker program. It's clear that we need to do something about the 8 to 12 million undocumented workers in the United States. We can't, society, it's not healthy for society to have so many people who are so isolated from the mainstream activities of the society. So the president has said recently that he intends to push in Congress for the passage of a temporary worker program. I'm not sure that it's going to he'll be successful with that. He said that he cared about it in the past, and he didn't really do much about it. We'll have to see. There are a couple other pieces of legislation, I think, that are more likely to pass. One is called the Ag Jobs Bill. It's an agricultural workers bill, give permanent residence to long-time agricultural workers who continue to do agricultural work, and that has bipartisan support, supported by the United Farm Workers Union, the AFL-CIO, and of course agribusiness. And then there's the DREAM Act, which also has bipartisan support. Senator Orrin Hatch, a Republican, Senator Ted Kennedy are two of the main proponents. The DREAM Act would give permanent residence to students who came to the United States before the age of 16, who were here for 5 years and either finished 2 years of college, graduated with college, passed the GED. So those bills I think, are more likely to pass in the next period of time.
Talk about the direction of U.S. policy, you know, over the last 4 years and prospectively over the next 4 years of the Bush administration, what you would do differently.
Well, as I mentioned, I mean, I think that the past 4 years there hasn't really been much change. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the problem, but nobody's really doing very much about it. I think that because the answer, the answer that I would support is some kind of broad legalization program, what some people call an earned amnesty or earned legalization after a certain number of years, doing certain kinds of work or having certain family ties. The large percentages of these millions of people would be able to become permanent residents. That's the only realistic answer, especially when you think about how international the world is becoming. It's so easy to move both capital and labor back and forth. We have all this discussion about outsourcing. So that's the only rational and reasonable solution, and that is the solution that's very difficult to sell to the American people when there's high unemployment. If we go through another period of economic boom, I think that that's the kind of solution that you see, because pretty much all the best organized sectors of society support that. It used to be that management supported immigration and labor was pretty restrictionist about it, up until just a few years ago when the AFL-CIO made a radical change in their policy, and now they're one of the major proponents of immigration reform. They support a broad amnesty. The management sector, the business sector have always supported, you know, a broad legalization. So, you know,
where's the opposition?
Where's the opposition? That's right. Well, the opposition is really in a small but very well organized and active and well-funded restrictionist group of individuals throughout the country. I don't think I think that restrictionism has a soft underbelly, and once the economy picks up, a couple of years ago, the Department of Labor came out with a study that said by the year 2020, we're going to have a critical shortage of labor in the United States.
Right.
We need immigrants.
Right.
We need immigrant labor. We need immigrants to be paying into the Social Security system, you know, so that people like you and I could get our retirement, because we just don't have enough young labor in the United States. Now, it's hard to put your arms around that in a time of high unemployment, when wages are going down, when workers are being laid off. But and I'm not an economist, but what I've read from the economists, it's true. That's the first thing, and that we are going to need this new labor. And two, it's just, as I said, it's just too expensive, it's too risky, it's too untenable, it's too unhealthy to have people who are afraid to go to get good health care, who are afraid to report crimes to the police, who, if somebody gets arrested on their block, are afraid to send their kids to school. So we need to do something about this large undocumented population. And, you know, even in terms of security, although there's no evidence that, you know, the immigration population as a whole is at risk, to the extent there's any need whatsoever to be concerned about anonymous people in our midst, one way to deal with that is to provide some kind of legal status to them. So That's a solution. It's the only logical solution. It's not politically viable today. It will be soon. If the economy picks up, if the economy doesn't pick up, I think the opposite is going to happen. I think we're going to see more and more restrictionism. There's going to be more and more scapegoating of immigrants, and some of these more restrictionist groups are going to have an easier time of convincing the American people that the problem isn't the economy, the problem isn't tax cuts to the rich, the problem is the immigrants.
But given the huge number of immigrants and the increasing number of immigrants at near historic highs as proportions of the New York City population, the American population, aren't you running against, for example, Republican efforts to bring Latinos into the party? Doesn't this have sort of perverse political consequences? Or is it just simply the fact that, as we know, if a policy issue doesn't have ownership by significant sectors of the policy elites, that nothing happens? Is that the situation?
Well, I think that in terms of the broad immigration reform, I think that there are broader social and economic factors than beyond whether immigrants are support the Democrats or support the Republicans. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, people, these parties are going to live or die by their policies. Immigrants are becoming more and more empowered. You look at New York City, you see the highest number of immigrants and elected officials than we've ever had, and growing.
And extremely diverse, from
Very
Latinos
diverse.
of various national backgrounds to Asians of various national backgrounds. So I come from Queens, and that is the most diverse county in the United States.
Absolutely. So, the immigrants are becoming more powerful. I mean, I think part of President Bush's, talk now about immigration has to do with his perception that the Republican Party has done better with immigrants and would like to do better in the future.
Okay. We have this new agency, the CIS, which replaced the INS. It seems to me, from what I've read, the little that I know, it's still a bureaucratic nightmare and a mess. Your judgment?
It's a bureaucratic nightmare and a mess. To be fair to the agency, there have been certain improvements. For instance, of course, every improvement comes with a glitch. There's a new system where you can make an appointment to see an officer at the Immigration Service online. Of course, the glitch is a lot of people don't have access to computers. So now they're going to respond to that by setting up some kiosks. The problem is, let's say your case has been delayed longer than the other people in your situation. You make an appointment, you go see the officer, and they say, "I'm sorry, sir, you have to wait. There's no problem with your case, it's just delayed." So InfoPass doesn't really change the fact. It means you don't have to stand in line in the snow to see an officer, but the answer is still the same. "I'm sorry, sir," or "I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't help you." So there's still this huge backlog in applications. There have been some improvements in New York City. There's a pilot program. So for the husbands and wives of U.S. citizens, they're being adjudicated in 90 to 120 days. But to become a U.S. citizen, a much simpler process, actually, than becoming a permanent resident based on marriage. It's still taking 12 to 14 months.
Now, are these inefficiencies designed? One could be a conspiracy theorist and say that the bureaucracies are intentionally incompetent, so to prevent large numbers of immigrants to get citizenship status. I mean, is there any validity to that, conspiracy theory that it doesn't work because it's almost designed not to work?
I wouldn't put it exactly that way. The way I would put it is that without a strong constituency to put pressure on the agency to improve, it's not going to. It's going to be pushed aside, and other priorities that do have constituencies are going to take precedent in terms of when government goes to change or improve a public service. I mean, the IRS functions much better than the INS, or what's now called the CIS. Well, why is that? Well, there's a higher interest there. Also, I think that while it's not a conspiracy exactly, I do think there are certain sectors, including many politicians, who don't really want to see more immigrants becoming illegal in their particular area, because they're getting elected by a group of people who've been electing them, and now you get another 20,000 people in the district. It could shift.
Okay, last 2 minutes. Where to get help? One place is your U.S. Immigrant Immigration and Citizenship, your complete guide, which really does lay out immigrant assistance agencies, law and policy websites, sample forms, questions that appear on the application. Also, there's your own website, www.Allan Wernick, ALLANWERNICK.com, which is a very informative website that points out these agencies. Also, where else do you go, I mean, for help?
Well, one thing you can do is at my website, you can write to me. There's a way you can send me an email, and I can answer some questions, not all. I answer the ones I can in the Daily News. Unfortunately, I can't answer them all. And of course, you can write to the Daily News and send me questions. CUNY has a very a good website, and getting better, I'd like to think. That it deals with immigration issues. That's www.cuny.edu.
And we should have this up on the screen. Go ahead.
Right, /citizenship now. You can also call the immigration, well, we say to call the immigration hotline, but I would be cautious there, because the reports I've been getting lately is that a lot of the information provided by the hotline, by the way, these are contract service providers, these are not government employees, has been a little weak. If you want a private lawyer, if you think you can afford a private lawyer, I'm sorry, I need to go back.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The number I gave is the number of the New York Immigration Hotline. That hotline is a terrific place to get very good immigration law information. They can also refer you to a not-for-profit agency in your community that can provide free or low-cost services to you. And I want to give that's an excellent resource, and I want to give that number. It's 800-566-7636. Now, if you can afford a private lawyer, and you can get a great deal for $35. You can get a half-hour consultation with one of the best immigration lawyers in the city. That's by calling the Bar Association Legal Referral Panel. That's 212-626-7373. Or you can write to them at lrs@abcny.org. And finally, call 311, the New York City hotline, and they will, non-emergency information line, and they can sometimes refer you to an agency to help.
That's it. I have more questions. I'll have to ask you them at a subsequent date, but thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.